From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The movement, the work that I'm doing and this movement is really about survivors talking to survivors, right? Me Too is about using the power of empathy to stomp out shame.
Me Too, that's the rallying cry that has spurred women and men across the country and the world to speak out about their experiences of sexual harassment and abuse in the wake of the fall of Harvey Weinstein. We'll speak with Tarana Burke, a sexual assault survivor herself who launched the Me Too movement more than a decade ago. Then thousands of people marched for Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. this past weekend. We'll look at the lack of progress in Puerto Rico, where Hurricane Maria devastated the island 2 months ago.
This slowness, this total pace of just getting relief to people, life and death relief to people, it's unthinkable.
We speak with San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz. Then from Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico to Hurricane Harvey in Texas, we'll go to Dr. Robert Buller, the father of the environmental justice movement. What is environmental racism? All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with this Democracy Now! Special. Over the last 2 months, the political, media, and entertainment worlds have been rocked as thousands of women and some men have come forward to share their stories of sexual harassment and abuse. The catalyst was the historic disgracing of Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein, who now is being criminally investigated after dozens of women came forward to accuse him of rape, assault, and sexual harassment. Following the investigations by the New York Times and the New Yorker magazine, women across the United States and the world are now coming forward with their own stories involving many different men under the hashtag #MeToo. Well, we want to go back to the beginning of this historic movement. In the days after the Harvey Weinstein revelations, we interviewed Tarana Burke, an activist and sexual assault survivor herself who started the Me Too movement 10 years ago. She's now a program director at Girls for Gender Equity. We also spoke with Soraya Chemaly, a journalist who covers the intersection of gender and politics, and Alicia Garza, co-founder of Black Lives Matter. Democracy Now's Juan Gonzalez and I began by asking Tarana Burke about how she started the Me Too hashtag 10 years ago.
I have been working with young people for more than 25 years, and I worked in the South in 2007. And as a survivor of sexual violence myself, as a person who was struggling, trying to figure out what healing looked like for me, I also saw young people, and particularly young women of color in the community I worked with, struggling with the same issues, and trying to find a succinct way to show empathy. Right, we use a term called empowerment through empathy, and Me Too is so powerful because somebody had said it to me, right, and it changed the trajectory of my healing process once I heard that. And so because the rape crisis centers in the community I was working didn't go out to the schools, they didn't do outreach, and I'm an organizer by training, it made sense to me that you have to bring, you have to bring it to people. People are not going to seek it out. And so Me Too was about reaching the places that other people wouldn't go, bringing messages and words and encouragement to survivors of sexual violence where other people wouldn't be talking about it.
And your response to now what we've had, it's almost a succession of one big name after another being accused of sexual assault. Bill Cosby, Roger Ailes, Bill O'Reilly, Donald Trump, and now Harvey Weinstein.
R. Kelly, yeah. No, it's not a surprise, right? And I think that, I say all the time, I'm never surprised at these allegations. For every R. Kelly or Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein, there's the owner of the grocery store, the coach, the teacher, the neighbor who are doing the same things. But we don't pay attention until it's a big name, and we don't pay attention until it's a big celebrity. But this work is ongoing because this is pervasive.
I wanted to bring Soraya Chemaly into this conversation of the Women's Media Center Speech Project. Talk about this latest, these revelations, these rolling revelations against Harvey Weinstein because of the New York Times expose, followed by the New Yorker expose. The New Yorker expose is only there because the author went to NBC, Ronan Farrow, and he worked on it with them for months, and then they killed it, which is leading to say the least, enormous questions within NBC. What was their connections to Weinstein, putting a lot of pressure on the president of NBC. Talk about this, when this will even be reported, and the level of the women who have to make the charges for this to get this kind of attention, these A-list stars.
I think this is a very good example of the way overlapping systems of fraternity work to silence stories like these. We know that it takes a tremendous outpouring of really trauma from women working together in a campaign like Me Too to make people sit up and pay attention. But what we're really talking about is making people believe what women are talking about, because we have a very deep-seated distrust of what women say. And when women say it, it's very easy to dismiss and trivialize. And part of that process of stereotypes and myth-making comes directly from media. And media frames questions, decides which questions to ask, how to report, what language to use, and also whose voice matters and whose experience matters. So in an instance like this, we see very clearly that a person with extreme power and status in one industry was probably leveraging that power and status across industries, able to tap people possibly in the criminal justice system, people in the media system. And again, this, I think, is really common. It's not rare. It's just that we're seeing it at a very high level.
And could you talk about this in the context of a president, a presidency which itself, Donald Trump, has been repeatedly accused of sexual harassment?
So I think that what was most interesting in the wake of the Trump tape that was released a year ago was the difference in responses between men and women to what happened. And we saw a huge gap in understanding and empathy, honestly, during the debate that followed immediately after that tape was released. The tape was released, and millions of women were traumatized and shared stories with the Not Okay hashtag, very much like they did now. But when the debate happened in the immediate wake of that, there was a large-scale analysis done by Facebook of what people were talking about, what was important to them. And it involved looking at millions of comments and posts from around the world, but especially, I believe, in the United States. And it showed that for women, what Trump was saying and what it represented was a priority. It was either number 1 or 2 on the list of top 5. But for men, it didn't make the list at all. And I think that's important because our media systems and our legal systems and our political systems are still overwhelmingly dominated by men, overwhelmingly white men. So we're talking about 80% plus in almost all of those arenas, certainly of senior management. And that experiential difference, which is transformative in terms of producing knowledge, like really understanding what's going on, is missing in these institutions. And so it takes this immense amount of energy to just try and get institutions to recognize the harm that's being done by dismissing and trivializing experiences of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment, if you even think about the term, is a term that reflects the perspective of harassers. Women who are being harassed, men who are being harassed, this isn't a sexual experience for them. It's an experience of fear and threatened violence. It's very intimidating. There's always retaliation involved. So even the perspective of the framing of the language reflects the problems that we face.
I want to bring Alicia Garza into the conversation, co-founder of Black Lives Matter, Special Projects Director for National Domestic Workers Alliance, speaking to us from Los Angeles. Your response that about everything that has just been unfolding, now going from the charges, the allegations against Harvey Weinstein to, both Scotland Yard and the New York Police Department investigating him criminally, and then the massive response to Tarana's Me Too movement that started really 10 years ago, but now picking up steam like we've never seen before?
Well, I first have to just say a deep thank you to Tarana for creating this space for survivors like myself. Without that space, I wouldn't be able to tell my story, and thousands of other people that I know would not be able to tell their stories. And you and I share someone in common who you are a mentor to. And when she reached out to me yesterday and said, you know, my mentor, Tarana, started this, and I want to make sure that Black women's work is not erased. I had to agree. My thoughts about this are that exactly what Tarana said earlier, that this kind of violence is as American as apple pie. I'm both heartbroken by all of the stories that I've seen being shared. There's more stories being shared every day. And lots of people that I know that I'm in community with and people that I don't know are asking themselves, what do we do about this epidemic of violence? Violence against women of color, violence against Black women, queer people, trans people, and even what do we do about violence against men, right? Cis men, trans men. This kind of patriarchal violence really functions off of shame and silence. And it's not lost on me that every single person who told their story about Harvey Weinstein talked about how they were silenced, how they were encouraged not to speak up, how they were embarrassed or ashamed to speak up. And so the power of this movement of Me Too, this power of empathy, this power of connection is really about empowering people to be survivors, to be resilient, and also to make really visible that sexual violence is not about people's individual actions, that this is a systemic problem that then requires different types of responses to deal with how systemic this problem actually is.
I'd like to ask Tarana, as the founder of this movement, where do you think it needs to go from here on?
So the movement, the work that I'm doing and this movement is really about survivors talking to survivors, right? Me Too is about using the power of empathy to stomp out shame. And so we need to keep talking about it, right? It doesn't need to be, I mean, I appreciate the hashtag and I appreciate the hashtag elevating the conversation, but it's not a hashtag, right? It's not a moment. This is a movement. The reason why people didn't know my name is because people don't think about this unless there is something big happening. So what needs to happen is that we need to stop just popping up when somebody famous does something, and we need to really look at the numbers, look at the people, look at the survivors, and think strategically. I think like an organizer. This is an epidemic, pandemic even, right? If you applied the numbers around sexual violence to any communicable disease, the World Health Organization would shut it down. It'd be all kind of, experiment and research around it.
You think a vaccine could be developed against it?
Oh, God, imagine, right? If we could stomp it out with just get your polio vaccine and stop sexual violence. But in actuality, it is that pervasive. And so we need to stop thinking about it in spurts and think about it as something that we need to constantly work on.
That's Tarana Burke, who started the Me Too movement 10 years ago. Soraya Chemaly, independent journalist covering the intersection of gender and politics, and Alicia Garza, co-founder of Black Lives Matter. To see all of our coverage about Me Too and this historic outpouring of stories about sexual harassment and assault, go to DemocracyNow.org. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute.
I've been a lonely girl. I've been a lonely girl, but I'm ready for the world. Oh, I'm ready for the world. I've been a heart for hire. I've been a heart for hire, and my love's on the funeral pyre. Oh, my love's on the funeral pyre. pick me out of the crowd. Oh, 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 oh.
The Body Electric by Alinda Segarra of Hooray for the Riff Raff, singing here in our Democracy Now! Studios. To see our full interview and the full performances of this Puerto Rican artist and musician, you can go to DemocracyNow.org. This is Democracy Now!, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with this Democracy Now! Special. Last Sunday, thousands of people rallied on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., calling for justice for Puerto Rico, 2 months after Hurricane Maria made landfall. The protesters called on FEMA to act quickly to restore services and for the cancellation of Puerto Rico's debt. They also demanded Congress permanently waive shipping restrictions under the Jones Act. Half of Puerto Rico remains without power. Hundreds of thousands of residents still have no access to clean drinking water. This comes as the head of the Puerto Rico Public Power Company, known as PREPA, resigned after facing widespread outrage and controversy for signing a $300 million contract with the tiny Montana-based company Whitefish, named after the hometown of Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke. Last month, under enormous pressure, Puerto Rico's governor, Ricardo Rosselló, instructed Puerto Rico's power company to cancel the controversial contract with Whitefish Energy. Well, we were in Puerto Rico a month ago, just as the cancellation of the contract was being announced. But a few days before, we went to the Roberto Clemente Coliseum, where the San Juan mayor, Carmen Yulín Cruz, and her vice mayor, Rafael Jaume, had just gotten their hands on the contracts and were analyzing the details, yes, of the $300 million deal with Whitefish and another $200 million contract between the power company and Cobra, which is an Oklahoma-based company. So you just got a hold of the both the Whitefish contract
and the Cobra contract, both of them this morning. We got
$300 million contract
and
for Whitefish,
$200 million,
$200 million for Cobra,
for both.
an Oklahoma-based company. And this is FEMA's statement from this morning.
FEMA's statement on this morning says clearly, the decision to award a contract to Whitefield Energy was made exclusively by Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, PREPA. FEMA was not involved in the selection. Questions regarding the awarding of this contract should be directed to PREPA. Following says, any language in any contract between PREPA and Whitefish that states FEMA approved that contract is inaccurate. Strong words. What about, I'll tell you this one.
And this is a part of the contract.
Article 59 in Whitefish contract. It says, in the event shall PREPA,
In no event
shall PREPA, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the FEMA administration, the Comptroller General of the United States, or any of their authorized representatives have the right to audit or review the cost and profit elements of the labor rates specified herein. That is, you can read it by yourself. That's it. There's no other thing that's black and white.
And this?
And this one says, this is Article 68, penalties, fines, and disallowed costs.
Disallowed costs.
Disallowed costs. By executing this contract, PREPA hereby represents and warrants that FEMA has reviewed and approved of this contract and confirmed that the contract is in acceptable form to qualify for funding from FEMA and other U.S. government agencies. Totally the opposite in contrast to what FEMA is saying.
You know what that means? That means that right there, that contract is null and void.
Yes.
It contradicts the laws of the United States of America, and it should be voided right now by the Puerto Rican government. And if the Puerto Rican government does not have the nerve to do what they have to do in order to do things right, then the U.S. government should do it. Because what this means is that we will not get reimbursed for a $300 million contract awarded to a two-employee company that did not have the expertise nor business getting into this business.
FEMA says PREPA wholly approved this.
Yes.
PREPA, of course, is the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority. Did PREPA approve this?
PREPA approved it. I have asked for, actually, the director of PREPA signed it. I have asked for PREPA to release the minutes of the meeting where this was discussed, but certainly FEMA did not approve this. That means we are not going to get reimbursed by this. And by declaring that, in fact, FEMA approved it, they were lying when they signed the contract.
The head of PREPA was lying.
Both parties. Both parties. Because if I was getting a $300 million contract based on the fact that I would get reimbursed by FEMA, I would have liked that in writing. Amounts much less than that, and decisions much less than that. I've said no until I have it in writing. So that is null and void right there. Right there. There is nothing. You cannot tell a governmental entity that you cannot audit a contract, that you have no right to request a time frame, and you cannot represent things that are not true in contracts. That is just basics of contract law. So this right here, it's null and void.
So you want this, do you want the Whitefish contract nullified?
It should be nullified. It is scandalous. It is an affront on our people. And frankly, again, when I called for this 2 days ago, their response from the Whitefish Twitter was threatening to take away the 44 men and women, I don't know if they have women working, they said men, and 40 more that were coming that day. So they have 84 people working in San Juan, which is the largest city in Puerto Rico. Not only that, now I would want to know, what is the work plan? Well, they don't have to have a work plan. You know why? Because in the contract it states that they don't have to finish anytime soon. So this is a gift of $300 million to two people. That's what this amounts to.
Do you think the head of PREPA should be fired?
Yes. He should have been fired a long time ago. A long time ago. What is beyond me is why the governor continues to say that this man has his support.
And the head of PREPA is?
Ricardo Ramos. Very, 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 very ineffective, very inappropriate, and frankly, somebody that doesn't even know what he's signing.
And the other contract, this is a $300 million contract, then there's a $200 million
with Cobra,
what's called Cobra contract?
That one, I haven't had a chance to look at it. We got it this morning. We went to the comptroller's office.
This also signed by the head of PREPA?
Yes, also signed by the head of PREPA. So it's very interesting because when you look at these contracts, they're already, some of them, I don't know if it's, I think it's this one already has addendums to it. They have already been changes. They've already been changes. You haven't even started.
These are the rates per hour, $400, $500
No,
per hour. So.
Cobra is an Oklahoma-based contract. I don't know if there's any relationship between Scott Pruitt, who's the former Oklahoma Attorney General and now the head of the Environmental Protection Agency.
I don't know either. But what I do know is that 2 and 3 is 5, and there's $500 million in here, one of which is utterly null and void, and it's, you know, very difficult to understand that in the United States, contractual law would allow one of the parties to be taken for a ride, because this is this PREPA contract is so odious and so not good for the Puerto Rican people.
You're holding the Whitefish contract.
Yes. And not only that, look, it was signed October 17th. I had the page this morning, October 17th. This is a $300 million contract. I hope to God that it has a lot more than these little tiny pages that we have here, because it's It's unnerving. It truly is unnerving, you know, that people can just swindle an entire population when they are at its most vulnerable.
That was San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz. I interviewed her last month in San Juan's Roberto Clemente Coliseum, where she and her entire mayoral staff were living after Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico. It made landfall on September 20th. I began by asking the mayor how Hurricane Maria has changed Puerto Rico.
I think September 20th changed the Puerto Rican reality forever. We live in a different San Juan and a different Puerto Rico, not because of what we're lacking. The majority of the island is still without any power. Only about 40 to 60% of the population has water. That doesn't mean that it's good water. We still have to boil it or put chlorine in it to be able to drink it. Medical services are really, really bad because of the lack of electricity. The supplies in the supermarkets are not there yet, so people are having a lot of trouble getting the supplies that they need. But still, the fierce determination of people has not dwindled. And to me, that's been a very, I would say, a big lesson to learn.
Can you talk about this public power company, the largest in the United States? Do you think there's an effort in this time, in the aftermath of the hurricane, of an effort to just privatize it for it totally to fail? And what do you think has to be done about that?
It cannot be privatized. I am, and a lot of people, totally against, because we are 100 miles long by 35 miles wide. That's a monopoly. It doesn't matter how you want to disguise it. It's a monopoly. And what we're doing is we're putting in private hands the decision as to where our economic development is spread, where the sense of equality or inequality will happen. So power isn't just about the power grid. It's also about the ability that the Puerto Rican people may have in the years to come to ensure that there is appropriate economic development and equally divided amongst all the 78 municipalities in Puerto Rico.
Disaster capitalism, what does that term mean to you? And do you think that's happening here, using a crisis to accomplish something that couldn't be accomplished otherwise?
You know, I wish I had never been introduced to that term. Also the shock treatment, right? Using the chaos to strip employees of their bargaining rights that took 40, 50 years for the unions to be able to determine. That is something very important. And it just means taking advantage of people when they are in a life or death situation. It is the most, an absolute mistreatment of human rights. It means that the strongest really feed off the weakest until everything that's left is the carcass. And what we cannot understand is why. Because that is so against the American spirit that we see. We have had in San Juan more than 500 volunteers in a span of 4 weeks, coming here, leaving their homes, taking their vacation, nurses, Teamsters, AFL-CIO, UFCW, Leona workers, just leaving their homes. I met a person from California that sold their Harley Davidson. Sold their Harley Davidson to come to San Juan and help for 2 weeks. You have, you know, the United States has a big heart. You know what it is to help those in need. And then the central government, the federal government in the United States seems to be just playing a totally different tune. This slowness, this turtle pace of just getting relief to people, life and death relief to people, it's unthinkable.
You mentioned death. As we flew in here, we heard about bodies being incinerated at morgues that are not counted. Do you actually know the death toll right now, and is that happening?
No, we don't know. It has been reported that 911 deaths have been, or bodies have been cremated since Maria. Why is that happening?
911.
Why is that happening? We have no idea. You know, usually when you cremate people at that rate, it's because you're trying to ensure that an outbreak of whatever disease doesn't come out. But whatever it is, we should know about it. And again, I don't understand why these things are not being openly talked about.
Let's go back to when President Trump attacked you. I think it shocked many people because by then people had heard of you. You were a familiar image across our TV screens as you were, waist chest high in water with your bullhorn, helping to save people and evacuate people. So that's the mayor of San Juan that we became familiar with. And then you have the President of the United States attacking you. What was the quote? First, you had the acting head of the Department of Homeland Security talking about
saying that this was a good news story. No, that really, I don't know if I can say the word on TV, but it really upset me. Because this has never been a good news story. When devastation hits and people are dying because they don't have dialysis, appropriate medical care, or food and water, whose mind and whose heart would call this a good news story? So I hadn't actually heard her say that. And I've actually met her twice after that, and we've had good meetings. Good things have come from those meetings. But to me, at that moment, it was like a total lack of connection with reality. Maybe in Trumpville or at Mar-a-Lago.
So President Trump says the mayor of San Juan, who was very complimentary of only a few days ago, has now been told by the Democrats, you must be nasty to Trump. He tweeted this from his Bedminster golf resort in New Jersey, and went on to say such poor leadership ability by the mayor of San Juan and others in Puerto Rico who are not able to get their workers to help. They want everything to be done for them when it should be a community effort.
You know what I thought? Poor guy. Poor guy. You know, it must be very difficult to live in a world where reality is very different to what you want it to be. And it's very easy to try to change the dialogue when you're failing. It's less like when he get himself a 10. Well, if it's a 10 out of 100, I agree, because it's still a failing grade.
Can you tell us what your meeting with him was like when President Trump came here? What we saw is the president hurling rolls of paper towels at hurricane survivors.
Yeah, what I heard was a president disconnected with reality and not representing the real values of the American people. A man that said, this is not a real catastrophe. Now, Katrina, that was a real catastrophe. He has then rescinded what he says. You know, he says one thing one day, he says another thing another day. It's very hard to keep up with the man, and who wants to, anyway. But he tried to avoid me. You know, I'm small, so it's easy for him.
Where were you?
I was sitting in a corner.
Where?
Oh, this was at the Muñoz Marin Air Force Base. And, you know, I went because you have to respect the presidency. And I went because I represent 350,000 people in San Juan. If it would have been him and me, I would have not wasted my time. But in a democracy, you have to respect the leadership, even though you don't see eye to eye with a person. So he finally, you can see in the picture, he had to very lean over because he was so far away from me, so he had to reach out. And I said, it's about saving lives, Mr. President. It's not about politics. And he looked over me and said, well, thank you, everybody. And I kind of chuckled, because if that didn't bother him, he would have said, I agree with you, right? But because it bothered him, then he didn't say anything. So all he did was, it was a feast of accolades to himself. Oh, we've done such a good job with the Coast Guard, and we've done such a good, and you know, in the meantime, I have a mayor sitting next to me saying, well, let him come to my town. And really, the reality is not, have things gotten better in San Juan? Yes. In the past week and a half, FEMA has responded more equitably, and a lot of it has to do with local politics. You know. And I have to say, after my second meeting with Secretary Duke, and he left John Barca here to be our connection with FEMA. He's from Homeland Security. Things got better. Are they where they're supposed to be? No. Can I see the light at the end of the tunnel? A week ago I could imagine it, now I can see, but that is not the situation for most of the other 77 municipalities in Puerto Rico. And I'm not going to be such a bad Puerto Rican that I'm going to say, oh, things, as long as they're good for me, then they're good for the world. Because then I would become Donald Trump, and heaven forbid I should ever be like that man.
You clearly came into office with the support of many unions.
Yes.
In fact, when we flew in from the airport today and you were holding a news conference with Bernie Sanders, there were representatives of a number of unions. And among them were the electrical workers. Mm-hmm. And they talked about the power company. There's been discussions about whether you could transform this largest public power company in the country that has had the biggest shortage and blackout of electricity that we've ever seen in this mm-hmm. country, as a possibly test case where you start to use solar power.
Yes.
Well, what about this? What do you see happening? Do you see this as an attempt to privatize, or do you see creative ways that Puerto Rico could move forward and be a pioneer in solar
Well,
energy?
there are creative ways. Tesla has already come to Puerto Rico and done a humanitarian work at the Children's Hospital, where they have energized it with solar panels. I mean, this is a Caribbean island. You know, we get lots and lots of sun, so we should be able to reach goals that are increasing every year to move away from our addiction of fossil fuel to non-fossil fuel. And we should also be able to energize communities just using solar power, and perhaps some wind power if it's appropriate. But for the first time, at least, I heard today the president of the power company saying that they of the union saying that they are looking forward to transforming the system and moving towards a better mix of regular our grid and solar power energy. And that was very refreshing to hear. So for those of them that say, no, the unions just want to keep us one step behind, it's not true. That's just, again, you change the dialogue, you attack, so as to not to be able to defend. It's a lot easier to attack somebody than to defend what you believe in.
So talk about Senator Sanders coming here, who ran for president. Some say if he were the candidate against candidate Donald Trump, he might have won. But he was here in Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. What did he do here? And what do you think he can do as a senator?
Well, he came here to listen, which is very important. And he came here to see firsthand. He didn't come here to throw paper towels at people. He came here and he walked around one of the most devastated areas of San Juan. He talked to the community board there.
Where did he go?
Playita. It's on the way to the airport or on your way from the airport. And it's a very, very disenfranchised community. The community board, the municipalities work to organize them, and they are starting to come into power. And we say that because we really and truly believe that the communities should hold the power of their own destiny. That doesn't make it easier for us, but it makes it right. And that's what it's all about. So when we talk about Puerto Ricans needing power, it's not only electrical power that we need, but it's the true power that makes your voice be heard. And one of the things that I think Senator Sanders is going to do, which he has done before for Puerto Rico, is that he can be the echo of 1,000 voices that are clamoring for the appropriate help to listen to this. We get $4.9 billion, and although we're very grateful, it's a loan. So what is the way of treating a country that is $72 billion in debt, increase their debt by $4.9 billion. That doesn't make any sense. There should be a comprehensive package that includes education, medical, the medical system, our energy grid and the transformation of that grid, economic development, small business development, and reconstruction of homes. And those are the things that we talked to Senator Sanders, and also not allowing this chaos to be a way of devaluing our university educational system by taking resources out, closing 50 municipalities, which will have to close if the $350 million that the Fiscal Control Board took away. Look, you have $4,900 million. Well, heck, give back the $350 million that you took away from the Fiscal Control Board. So those are very, very precise things that he could talk about. One of the things that the president of the local teachers union said is, look, they're telling us they're going to close schools because the Army Corps of Engineers has not inspected them. Well, first of all, get more people to inspect them. And secondly, the Army Corps of Engineers didn't inspect them to begin with. So if they have minor damages, let's get moving in the business of teaching our children how to become better human beings.
Speaking of education, whether it's Hurricane Harvey or Hurricane Irma, while the media covers it extensively, almost 24 hours a day, Puerto Rico dealing with Maria, I would say less, but still has been significant coverage. Flashing the words extreme weather, severe weather, almost never, and I'm not talking Fox, I'm talking MSNBC and CNN, do they talk about global warming, climate change, climate chaos?
That's because some people think it's a hoax.
Well, we have a very proud climate change denying president.
But it's not a hoax.
But this is the media, and considered the more liberal media.
And we are seeing the effects of this. Tomorrow, we are expected to have heavy rains in San Juan and in the rest of Puerto Rico. So you had Irma, you had Maria. But Maria didn't stop until, just like Harvey. The rain didn't stop until a few days later. Maria's rain didn't stop until a few days later. So you have global warming. It is happening. It is real, and here it is. There's no denying it, and we have to deal with the consequences of our actions and take actions to revert that and make sure that we don't screw it up for the next generations more than we've already done.
That was San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz. I interviewed her last month in San Juan's Roberto Clemente Coliseum, where she and almost her entire staff were living after Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico. When we come back from the aftermath of one hurricane to another, we'll go to Texas to speak with Dr. Robert Bullard. He's known as the father of the environmental justice movement. What is environmental racism? Stay with us.
Say it loud and there's music playing. Say it soft and it's almost like praying. It's almost like praying. It's almost like praying. It's almost like praying. It's almost like San Sebastián, mi viejo San Juan, Isabela, Maricao, Fajardo, Dorado, Hormiguero, Humacao, Luquillo, Atillo. Vega Baja, Toa Alta, Toa Baja, Mayagüez, otra vez, Aguadilla, Quebradilla, Guayanilla, Juanadías y Calle. Hey, it's almost like praying.
Like Praying by acclaimed Puerto Rican playwright Lin-Manuel Miranda, creator of Hamilton. That song featuring Ruben Blades and Puerto Rican singers Gilberto Santa Rosa, pop star Jennifer Lopez, among others. Miranda recorded the song after Trump tweeted, Puerto Ricans, quote, want everything to be done for them. In response, Lin-Manuel Miranda tweeted, you're going straight to hell, real Donald Trump. No long lines for you. Someone will say, right this way, sir. They'll clear a path, unquote. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We are just back from COP23, the UN Climate Summit in Bonn, Germany, where the Trump administration tried to derail the conference by pushing coal, nuclear, and gas as solutions to climate change. Well, on this Democracy Now! Special, we're looking at the ways climate change is already affecting the United States. We turn now to Houston, which was devastated by massive flooding from Hurricane Harvey. The storm shattered all past U.S. rainfall records, forcing hundreds of thousands of people to evacuate their homes in the fourth largest city in the United States. Some call it the Petro Metro, Houston, because it's home to the country's largest refining and petrochemical complex. The storm also caused massive environmental and public health impacts. According to the Environmental Defense Fund, more than 1 million pounds of air pollution have been released into the air as petrochemical plants were forced to shut down by the storm. Well, over Labor Day weekend, just as the floodwaters were receding, Democracy Now! Traveled to Houston, where we spoke with Professor Robert Bullard, among others. Dr. Bullard is professor at Texas Southern University, a historically black college and university. He's considered the father of environmental justice. We spoke with Professor Bullard at his home, which he had just returned to after evacuating. I began by asking him about his experiences of the flood.
I had been monitoring the storm. I had been watching TV and getting very little sleep. And then we were informed that we had a mandatory evacuation. And I heeded that call, and I tried to move as much of my belongings from downstairs upstairs. And actually, I used muscles that I hadn't used before in that process. And so I evacuated on Tuesday and was able to call a friend and was able to take my little bag over and stay until this morning. I came back this morning.
So, in fact, your home didn't flood?
No, we didn't flood. The water came up to on the streets, around surrounding streets, and some water came on the street, came up to the curb, but it did not flood. And it was, kind of a challenge getting out of the subdivision to get over to my friend's house, but I was able to maneuver and avoid the water and drive my car, in a way that I was not driving into water. But it was a challenge, but nothing like what other people have experienced.
You have written so much about and been so deeply involved in issues of environmental racism, environmental justice. Do you see the issue of environmental racism, and I'm going to ask you to define it first, playing out here in Houston around the storm?
Well, I think when we look at the color of vulnerability and we look at which communities are actually at greatest risk from disasters and floods like this, historically it's been low-income communities and communities of color, communities that live in low-lying areas that are very prone to flooding, and it's very difficult to get insurance, not just flood insurance, but regular insurance because of redlining. So what Harvey has done is to expose those inequalities that existed before the storm. And, as disasters like this widen and exacerbate inequality. And so the communities that are most at risk from not having the kinds of infrastructure in those areas in terms of flood protection, in terms of trying to get out, in terms of transportation, et cetera. I mean, it played out, up close and personal. And I think as we start to see some of the demographics in terms of communities that will take longer to return, will take longer to get their houses back in order, longer to get their communities and infrastructure back in order. This is not rocket science. And those communities that, and individuals, households that don't have that cushion to ward off that kind of disruption, it's always much more difficult for them to return. And I don't see this any different in Houston, and what we have to do is guard against building and rebuilding on that inequity.
We just did a toxic tour of Houston. We were over in Baytown next to the ExxonMobil refinery. I think it's something like the second largest refinery in the country. Right by it, people flooded out. And you've got many different aspects of this crisis, but one is the contract workers who work at ExxonMobil. They just lose their jobs when the refinery shuts down, and they also get flooded. And the question is, who will get help and who won't? But that issue, for example, while the Republican Texas congressional delegation largely voted against vast help for the Northeast during Superstorm Sandy, clearly Texas will get billions of dollars for FEMA and to rebuild overall. How is it determined who gets support and who doesn't?
Well, you know, the way it works is those individuals in those communities, those families and households that have the resources and the wherewithal to maneuver through this maze of bureaucracies of filing information online and getting access to the different organizations that can assist and support, getting, you know, the FEMA grants and the SBA loans and all those things. It's not rocket science, but it's not easy to do that. And if you have individuals who are used to getting online and getting access to information and processing that, they have a head start. You know, there are lots of households right now that are actually hiring contractors that have already gutted their houses and that have already, you know, signed individuals on to fix up and remodel and bring their houses and back to life. And it's not any mystery as to which communities that will somehow be the last to do that. And these are the same communities that didn't have access to loans in terms of neighborhoods loans because of redlining. And what we have to guard against is this rebuilding redlining that somehow allows more affluent communities to access the system, get their communities back in order, and those who are left behind, somehow those areas will be the last to come back. So it has to be an equitable recovery, equitable development, and to make sure that those families that somehow may, you know, who's to say that one community should be built or rebuilt, not be rebuilt? And those are policy decisions, and if money is not invested in those areas, and if infrastructure is not invested in those areas, and many of the areas in many of the communities in Houston do not have the infrastructure to protect them from man-made disasters in terms of the flooding, the lack of infrastructure in terms of the protection. You know, a lot of our neighborhoods just have open drainage ditches, gullies, and just very minimum kinds of protection. And so it floods, you know, routinely. And so we're talking about this, you know, biblical flood. And so you can see how not only will they get washed out in terms of their homes, they'll get washed out in terms of their income.
This is the 30th anniversary of the publication of your book, Invisible Houston, The Black Experience in Boom and Bust. Talk about Invisible Houston.
In Invisible Houston that I wrote 30 years ago, there's a huge population that is still invisible. Houston's demographics, you know, a lot of people like to say we are one of the most diverse ethnically and racially cities in the country. We're the fourth largest city in the country. We are racially and ethnically diverse, but when it comes to economics, when it comes to power and decision-making, it stops. And so when we talk about this whole question of how invisible How can we make invisible communities visible? Those communities that have been inundated before the storm by pollution, environmental degradation, living on the fence line with very dangerous kinds of facilities. And when a storm like this happens, it exposes those vulnerabilities. And you have all of this pollution, all of this, oil and chemical plants, and that kind of pollution that's now exposed in the water. And when the water recedes, it's going to leave residue. It's going to leave all kinds of stuff that on the school grounds, on the playgrounds, and on people's yards. And so how we're going to deal with those sediments that's left, and we need testing done. We have to make sure it is safe. All the mold, we learned from Katrina that people want to get back in their homes, and that in some cases they're rushing to get back without the proper protection. And with the mold in those homes and people getting sick, we have to make sure that we provide equal protection and equal access to resources to make sure that we do it right.
How do you do that?
Well, it means that we have to have strong community-based organizations on the ground with the capacity to assist and support families and households that can get things right, that can pressure and apply the points of saying, well, we need to make sure that just because you don't have a car, just because you don't have a big bank account, doesn't mean that you should not be safe, that your community should not come back, and that you should not have the same level of protection, the same level of importance as if you were a middle-class white neighborhood. That's what we have to ensure. Houston is very segregated along racial and economic lines, and this flood has really shown that. If you look at zip code, you can map where that vulnerability is. You can also map how resources have been allocated and distributed over the last 50 years. And so what we have to do is we have to map the resources that come to this region, come to this area, and we can show and we can actually fight for to make sure that the resources that flow do not somehow flow in a way that somehow leaves those invisible communities. And in this case, I wrote Invisible Houston in '87. Invisible Houston, right, when I wrote it then, was Black Houston. But we're talking about a very diverse Houston today, and the Latino population is almost 50%. So when you talk about the invisibility and you talk about where the population lives, you talk about not only a disaster in terms of the flooding, you talk about a disaster in terms of the environment, the pollution, the health threats, the potential for the kinds of impacts that we will see, years to come. And the most vulnerable in our society is children, and we have to make sure that we protect our children, our vulnerable population.
That's Professor Robert Bullard, professor at Texas Southern University, author of, among other books, Invisible Houston. It's the 50th anniversary of that publication. He's considered the father of the environmental justice movement. To see all of our coverage of the hurricanes that hit Texas, Puerto Rico, Florida, the Caribbean, the wildfires of Northern California, as well as our week special from Bonn, Germany, the UN Climate Summit, go to DemocracyNow.org. And that does it for our show. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alkoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Renee Feltz, Trina Nadura, Amel Ahmed, Nat Needham, Dennis Moynihan, Nicole Salazar, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, Paul Huckabee, engineer. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.